Well, hi, folks. I, the first week in March, I was a speaker at the 70th anniversary celebration of the Bermuda Rose Society. So that's what I want to talk about today. Those of you who have been here forever know that I've talked to this group several times about Bermuda and their roses, and I don't want to have too much overlap there, but I realize to some of you this may be new. So I have a few catch-up slides here, not ketchup, but catch up. So for those who don't know where Bermuda is and think it's down somewhere down near Jamaica, no, it's east of South Carolina. It's the dot right there that's too small for you to see. It's one of the most remotely inhabited islands on the earth. The closest land is Cape Hatteras, which is a little over 600 miles. The island's about 21 miles long, never more than a mile and a half wide, so it's quite small. But it has been a British colony since the early 1600s. It was first settled when the ship, the Sea Venture, ran aground there on its way to the Jamestown colony. And then they built two ships using local lumber to get off the island and go on to Jamestown. Some people stayed, some went on to Jamestown, realized that was not a good place to be and went back to Bermuda and have been there ever since. And I think I've told you that on both of those journeys, my 10 times great-grandfather was on board. So, but never lived in Bermuda after that. So anyway, because he was also in the Mayflower. But this is Bermuda. And I'm usually quite good at putting graphics into PowerPoint, but after half an hour of fighting with it yesterday, I absolutely cannot make it show the bottom of the island. So I apologize, it ends right there. But the airport is out here. I don't have a lot of these maps going through again, so you may not remember. There's the airport, St. George's, and then Hamilton, which is the main town. And then on the day we go out to the dockyards, they're way out here. It's actually a whole bunch of islands, although they refer to it as the island. And all of those inhabited ones have bridges between them. So it behaves as if it were one island. So the Bermuda Rose Society was founded in 1954. They are the first rose society in the world that was dedicated to preserving their own heritage roses. They had this group of roses they called the Bermuda Mystery Roses. And I don't know if it was the Garden Club or who, but somebody there who was horticulturally interested said, we need a society specifically to preserve these roses. And so they've been going strong now for 70 years. I've talked to you about these mystery roses a little bit in the past. In 1987, the World Federation of Rose Societies had a regional meeting there. And that was just a few years after we had started our rose mosaic virus heat therapy program. So I was invited to go as a speaker. And that was the first time I went to Bermuda and discovered the mystery roses. Well, while I was there, the Bermuda Rose Society folks, and then Charles Walker, who was at that time, the president of the Heritage Rose Foundation, and Ruth Knopp from South Carolina, and I sent plants to the Huntington in Pasadena, California, of the Bermuda Mystery Roses. As far as we know, that's the first time they entered the US. Almost all of, this is Elizabeth Carswell, who some of you may remember from long ago, used to attend our meetings in the winter. There's Charles and Elizabeth and Judy Holly, Ruth Knopp there. So this is just getting things ready to go. After a long shipping time, getting through US Customs, a lot of the plants died. They had almost none of them that survived. So Claire Martin, who was the curator at the Huntington at that time, went on a vacation to Bermuda later and took plants back with him in his luggage. And so he eventually did get a full collection to the Huntington. But as far as I know, those never entered the nursery trade anywhere. So in January of '88, 1 year after that conference, my parents and I visited Bermuda as a vacation, and I brought back budwood of the mystery roses. They went through quarantine here on our campus and then into our gardens. And ultimately, I think Florida Southern is the source of pretty much all of the mystery roses that are sold in the US today. So then in 2004, they had their 50th anniversary and they invited me back to speak again. So they also had Ann Bird, who was the president of the Royal National Rose Society at the time, and Charles Walker and me. I don't have a picture of me speaking, so we'll have a picture of me having lunch. So, This is, I think, an interesting thing that they've done. These are photographs. This is a photograph of all of their past presidents of the society. Now, since then, they've actually had two men who were presidents, but up until then, they'd always been women. And they were all still living. Most of those ladies, unfortunately, are not anymore. But they got the picture of the whole group, which was nice. So now in 2024, they had their 70th anniversary, and I got invited back again. It's always fun to be invited to Bermuda. I was telling some of you earlier today, it's a very expensive place to visit. So when somebody invites you as a guest, that's the way to go. So they had Greg Lowry, who used to own Vintage Rose Gardens in Sebastopol, California, which was a wonderful nursery that sold old garden roses. They eventually went out of business, but their gardens have been maintained by a not-for-profit organization called the Friends of Vintage, and Greg is the curator of that garden still, and then me. So we stayed at Barn Grove, which is the home of Felicity and Peter Holmes. If you ever go to Bermuda, the place I would recommend that you try to stay is at their house. They have, it's not as if you're inviting them for the back bedroom. They do it as a bed and breakfast. Or I should say, no, more of it is self-catering. They have two small apartments on the lower floor of the house. And so you can get it with breakfast or without. If you want to just bring your own groceries, there are kitchens in there. So it's quite nice. And I do recommend that. Really good people too. Peter is a past president of the society, and they have one of the best rose gardens on the island. So these are their roses in their garden. So I was there the first week in March, and on the first day there, they had their annual membership meeting, general membership meeting. And so they started out with a judged rose show, and then I talked to them about growing their roses here in Florida. And then Greg talked about the identity of Bermuda's Kathleen, which I know some of us grow here. So these ladies are registering roses for the sale, for the show. Setting up their rose show. Their shows work very much like an ARS show would here. They do have some extra classes. They always have a class for the Bermuda Mystery Roses, most of which are not formally registered. They also do the window box arrangements. The idea there is to do a live arrangement in a box that looks like a painting, and it's judged based on how much it looks like a painting. So if you have a leaf that hangs slightly out over the frame, they're going to deduct points for that because you couldn't do that on a painting, which I think is kind of an interesting way to judge a show.
How are they staged? Yeah.
Those are, the boxes are about like that. They're wood. Think of taking a box the size of that box that Lindy has there, turning it on its side, painting it inside and outside black, mounting a picture frame in front of it. So you have this black hole that you can put a bouquet in. And they have different sizes of them, so you can request one of a certain number of inches each way, and you sign them out. You don't have to own your own. They also have a photo class where you can enter photos of your roses. And then this is arrangements not in the shadow box. So these are the judges and the clerks. They invited us as speakers to go along and observe. So I'm kind of following along there, being silent. Of course, they have cookie time, like all good societies do. This is Emmy Gray, which won the Best in Show award. That's one of their mystery roses. And Felicity Holmes, the hostess at the house where we stayed, won that. So then they're getting ready for the talks. That's Greg sitting down front, for those of you who don't know Greg Lowry. Greg, I've known Greg since the early to mid 1980s, and I would say of the world of rose people and their knowledge, I would say as far as identifying a rose, he would be in my number one position of who I would consider. You can show him almost any rose and he'll name it instantly. He grows something like 3,000 varieties of hybrid teas and then many other classes. It's insane. And as you're walking through his garden, nothing has a label on it. You'll say, oh, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so. And you think, how does he do that? I have no idea. I mean, I think I'm doing really well to know my 250 roses. And every once in a while, I'll have to say to Maria in the garden, which one is this? I'm not remembering. So in any case, Greg's very good at that. So this is Marika Petrus. Many of you have met Marika. She's on the board of directors of the Heritage Rose Foundation. She's also current or past treasurer of the World Federation of Rose Societies, and she is the president currently of the Bermuda Rose Society. And so there I'm talking about growing Bermuda's mystery roses in Florida. And then Greg talked about the identity of Bermuda's Kathleen. And then on the next day, we had something to do every day. And then in the evenings, they would take us out to dinner. So it was a fun week. On the second day, I did a workshop on growing your own roses from seeds and hybridizing roses. That is tentatively our program for here for September. So we'll do kind of the same thing. These meetings were mostly held at the Bermuda Botanic Gardens, which is quite a nice garden, although it's kind of gone to seed, just due to. Let me back up a bit and say Bermuda is a country. I mean, it is a colony, but it's self-governing. They have their own parliament. They only have a population of about 50,000. So it's a country 1/3 the size of Lakeland. And so there's only one government, the government, and they own and operate the Botanic Garden. Well, as happens in government, when they lost their good horticultural director, they put a political friend in the place who knew nothing about plants and couldn't care less. And that was over a number of years. So the garden's in kind of sad shape right now. They're trying to bring it back. It's been on the front page of the newspaper. Think about that, having your botanic garden on the front page of your newspaper day after day. But the people really want it fixed, and I hope they will. So in preparation, the day before, I had gone out and collected pollen. Those are anthers off of flowers from a bunch of things in Felicity's garden. She said, yeah, you get anything you want. So I kind of massacred her garden for flowers. And then this was the group gathering. So we did two things. We started out with how do you pick flowers that you want to make a cross from, how to collect pollen from the one you want to use as a male parent, and how to pollinate the one you want to use as a female parent. And then we skipped ahead the 3 to 4 months that it takes the hips to ripen. I also had ripe hips out of their gardens, so we extracted seeds and cleaned them and talked about how you prepare those for germination. So in 1 2-hour session, we kind of went through a whole year of growing roses from seed. So that's what these folks are cutting open rose hips and taking the seeds out. They're cutting anthers off for pollen. So it was a fun event. I think we'll probably do something similar in September, make it more of a hands-on workshop. Then the next day they had their 70th anniversary luncheon, and Greg was the speaker for that, a time capsule of roses. And this was at the Royal Hamilton Amateur Dinghy Club. And this is the view. I think Bermuda is one of the prettiest places I've ever been. Very maritime, of course, and just a beautiful place. I know some of you are interested in rose arrangements, so I took pictures of lots of arrangements on this trip. These are the table arrangements with roses there and begonias. A lot of them have freesias in them. The freesias were blooming. There's the menu in case you're interested. Quite a fancy luncheon. Even the napkins were folded to look like roses. There's the fish dish, and here's the chicken dish and the desserts. So as I said, Greg spoke then. So other than attending and getting to eat well, I didn't have anything to do that day. So that was kind of nice. Actually, they had problems with their their computer and PA system set up. So I did get to play tech guy for a while. So the next day then we had workshops with the Parks Department. So the Parks Department worked for the government, and Greg did general rose garden practices, and I did general fruit orchard practices. And this was at the Botanic Garden again. That's a gigantic ficus tree at the Botanic Garden. So these are some of their roses. As you can see, they're not in great shape. The beds are not beautifully maintained. The roses are there. They're healthy enough, but they're not really highly maintained. This is Cremosi superior. And then in front of some of the buildings, they have plantings of roses. This is an area that upgraded recently with new plantings. And then they had 20-some workers show up that day. So we split them into two groups, and I took one group to the orchard and Greg took the other group to the rose garden. And then halfway through, we traded audiences and did it again.
Mhm.
The next day, then we went to their official National Rose Garden, which is at Waterville, one of their National Trust properties. And Greg and I both talked to their volunteer group there about just that garden has struggled, and we just talked about what we saw as being problems with it, how they might tend to fix those. And hopefully that was helpful. I think some of the problems they were having were pretty obvious, and so we were able to help them with that. These folks are really gung-ho gardeners, but they're backyard amateurs, and so they have not had any horticultural training formally. They don't have something like a master gardener program. And so it's really useful to them to have someone come in and just, say, well, here's, I would have pruned it this way. I would have fertilized it this way. And I think that's very useful to them.
Mhm.
Safrano, some of the volunteers. So later that day, we went to Tula Valley. That's where the government has their nursery for all of the parks and other public areas on the island. And the Bermuda Rose Society leases a small portion of that nursery where they do their propagation of roses. And so they also have a good group of volunteers from the Bermuda Rose Society who do that. So Greg and I showed our own methods of rooting cuttings. We do it a little differently from each other. So they saw two methods different from what they do. Notice all the freesias. They are naturalized all over the island. The whole place smells like freesias. It's an amazing thing. Several years ago, I took a junior journey group, that's a group of college students, and Alicia went as chaperone. And two of the guys were so enamored with those flowers. One of them said, "Do you think they'd mind if we just kind of rolled around in these for a while?" And I said, "I think they would mind very much. Stay off their flowers." But it does make the whole island smell really wonderful. So this was the group, and there's demonstrating making cuttings. Everything in Bermuda is expensive. It's expensive to get there. And so in order to justify bringing in international speakers, they really put you to work. So we were there for 8 days, had something to do all but one of those days. And they shared the cost with the Bermuda Garden Clubs, who also had us do things for them. So you'll see some of that here too. The next day, then, Greg did a workshop on identifying what horticultural class a rose belongs to. I found that really useful. I helped set up, but I didn't have any other responsibilities that day. But he had lots of literature set out, and then plants that he was able to get from people's gardens, I should say clippings, of teas and noisettes and chinas and bourbons and hybrid teas and ramblers and all the other things you can think of. And he had them identified, and we went around and talked about characteristics. And then he had a wall of mystery plants where you were to go and decide, is this a tea or a china? Why do you think so? And then he would grade you on that in a nice way, not threateningly. But it was really useful, and I think people got a lot out of that. That's not something I've seen done anywhere before. know if we'd ever want to bring Greg here to do that for us, but it would be a good workshop if we did. Then on the Thursday was our only real free day. We got to play tourists. So this is downtown Hamilton, the main town, very beautiful. I walked by St. Andrew's Presbyterian Church because it has a nice rose garden surrounding the property. And so there's Old Blush and Smith's Parish doing its color thing that it does. That's Old Blush again, Bermuda Rose Superior. This is one of their mystery roses that we don't have in the US, and I'm forgetting the name of it at the moment, but that's one we never managed to bring here. I think this is Sancy, one of their mysteries, and Carnation, one of their mysteries. This is the Bermuda Cathedral. They don't have a state church, but they are predominantly Anglican. And then we took the ferry across to the dockyards. This was a naval base for many, many years. This is where the National Museum is now. And Smokey Wingood and his wife Peggy did a lot of the research on the Sea Venture, that sunken ship. He was a Royal Navy diver for many years. And the reason I mention that is that Peggy was a real leader in the Rose Society the first time I went there. And so we got to know them. And interesting story about Smokey. We had dinner at their house and they had Wedgwood china for all their table service. I think he said they had service for 32. Think of what that would have cost. But it didn't cost them anything because there used to be a luxury ship that went between England and Bermuda that was so ritzy that you would have your dinner on these plates and then you would frisbee them out the portholes just for fun. And so the harbor is covered with Wedgwood plates. Being a diver, he went and got his wife service for 32 at the bottom of the harbor. So this is back in the late 80s. My dad and Smokey, some of you remember my dad, they became good buddies immediately because they'd both been military. So and neither one of them was much into roses. So they got to talk military stuff. If you have seen or if you have a copy of the original Bermuda Rose Bush, this is Rose Book. This is their Agrippina, which is what we call Crema Superior. And this was in the front garden of Smokey and Peggy's house. And that is the plant from which the cuttings came that grow in our garden. And if you've bought an Agrippina or Crema Superior that came from the Bermuda Mystery Roses, then you also grow that exact rose from that house. It is a beautiful place. They have bright blue water, as you tend to have in islands. This was lunch, probably the most classically Bermudian lunch you can have. It's a fried fish sandwich with coleslaw on top of the fish on very thick, very sweet raisin bread. That's the way you have to have it. And the first time I tried it, I thought, this is really weird. And then I tasted it. I thought, this is perfect. You couldn't make a better fish sandwich than that. They really are good. So I had 4 of them during the week. Not all at once, different meals. So on the 8th, then we had the general meeting of the Bermuda Garden Club. Greg talked about mild climate roses, and I talked about propagation as well as fertility and fertilizer use, nutrition. And they had a judge show for the garden club, which included roses, but had a lot of other plant types. So there are hibiscus, the rose exhibits. That's another one of their mystery roses that we don't have. And again, I've forgotten the name of it. I thought this was interesting. They were judging lettuce. So, you know, now to just score this down because that hangs out over the frame. Not good. Had they raised that whole thing up an inch, you probably would have won something. And cookie time, of course. These meetings were all held in the botanical hall, the horticultural hall of the Botanic Garden. So you see this room over and over. Later that day, then we did tours of private gardens, and actually there's a couple days we did private gardens in the afternoon, so I've combined them here. But members of the Bermuda Rose Society from all over the island, and a lot of them grow some very nice roses. It's a difficult place to grow roses. They're almost like the Homestead area of Florida. They have a lot of lime rock in their soil, so it's difficult to dig a hole. And even when you do, it tends to have a very high pH because it is limestone. They're also, you're never, ever more than a mile from seawater. They get hurricanes way more often than we do. And so they often are in the low-lying areas get inundated in seawater. The high areas get salt spray at the very least. So it's a challenging place to grow roses, but they do a nice job of it. And that's one of the nice things about these mystery roses. They have survived with very little care for generations under those conditions. That's Souvenir de la Maison. This is Carter House, the oldest house remaining in Bermuda from the mid 1600s, and that's a Cramoisi Superior in front of it. A little bed of roses out front. That's that Cramoisi Superior. This is Bermudiana, the national flower, Cicerencium Bermudiana. And John Howell's garden. John is their newsletter editor. This is his little propagation area. Lots of people propagate roses, and they don't use mist or plastic bags or anything. They just put them out like that. A lot of them die, but some of them live. So I found that interesting, that just stick them in and see what happens. This was the most elaborate garden we visited. This man, I don't know his history. He is multi-generation Bermudian. This was a large and beautifully landscaped garden. Clean gardening. So I thought you would enjoy that poster. Lunch, I had another fish sandwich. And this is the town of St. George, and this is St. Peter's Church, the oldest Anglican church in the Western Hemisphere. And their museum. A lot of these places have roses growing around them. So there again is Cramoisi Superior, growing quite large. Old blush just over a wall at somebody's house. That is their Emmy Gray, one of the mystery roses. That's Emmy Gray again. Rosette Delisi. I think because of their cooler weather than ours, they get brighter colors than I get on my Rosette Delisi. I've always envied that level of color, which I almost never see in my garden. But that's a great tea rose. This is Peggy Martin. And on the day we were there, they discovered it had sported to this almost white brand. So they're propagating that now. And if it's stable, they may register that as a different rose. Diana Antonician is also a past president and their representative to the World Federation of Rose Societies. She does a lot of propagation in her yard. And so here she's showing us her method of rooted cuttings. She actually does enough of these that she not only sells them through the annual rose sale of the society, she also sells them to two local nurseries. So their roses are available commercially. Her husband then is as much of an orchid nut as she is a rose nut. So he's got a great orchid collection too. Some of you may remember Lisbeth Cooper, who was, she came to every foundation meeting we've ever had here, and was a real leader in their society for many years. She was the most stickler of an editor I've ever met, although very kind about it. And so when I used to do the Heritage Rose Foundation newsletter, I would get this little note from Lisbeth: I like your newsletter, but I found errors here and here and here. She was always right, always. So I would figure out I shouldn't do that next time. Well, she's unfortunately gone now, but this is her granddaughter, Kate, who has inherited the house. And so Kate is maintaining her grandma's garden, which we were very pleased to see. So this is Lisbeth's old garden, now run by Kate. And then we had a potluck dinner at Marika's house that evening. Marika's house is, even by Bermuda standards, big. It's a mansion. And so lots of room for these 30 or 40 people who showed up. I don't want to spend too much time on dinner party pictures, but it's a nice event. And it was a potluck, so people brought all kinds of dishes. We ate well. This is Marika with a painting of roses in one of her rooms in the house. I asked her to pose for that. And leaving the island then, this is flying home. So that was a quick tour, but if I can answer any questions, I'll be happy to.
What's the growing zone? I mean, is